What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Metal Maniacs podcast. I'm your host, Jay Ingersoll, and I'm here with a man who wants his money for nothing and his chicks for free, my co-host.
That's your boy, Mod. What's good?
What's up, buddy?
I need a certain high class level of female, which fortunately I do have locked down in my life. So
Money for nothing and chicks for free.
I'll
He
take
wants
the money.
his MTV.
Yeah, I miss MTV actually,
Yeah.
if you can believe it.
That was a great song, too.
I'm surprised it didn't get canceled.
How you doing today?
I'm good, man. I'm really good. Thank you. Yep.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yep. Life is good.
Glad to be here. I'm a little bit on the rough side this morning. 2 nights ago, I slept, when you sleep weird and then you wake up and you got some weird muscle pull.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday, it was just a little bit irritating, but last night must have aggravated it more. Now I turn and I'm just like, fucking making those noises where you're
Same.
like, oh, it's on fucking fire right now. Jesus Christ.
It's a real thing. You get a couple decades into this life, and sleeping can hurt you. Living can hurt you. Doing next to nothing at all, you can hurt yourself. I was having some lower back pain. I don't know what I did. Just random. And that subsided. And then yesterday I was just having like all of the cramps from my thighs down to my calves, like just basically the lower half of my body. And I feel like maybe it was from walking excessively the other day. I was out at Cruise Park walking the dog and the kid, trudging through the dunes, trudging up and down the beach. They got all those staircases and everything. And that was Wednesday. I'm like, it's Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm sore 3 days later, but possibly. Who knows?
Yeah.
We do walk a lot.
Yeah.
We
That's
get
good, though.
We get it in.
Good for you. Well, today we are going to ride that Gojira train all the way. That's popular right now. We did talk about it on our new weekly episode. So if you guys haven't checked that out, we have a new weekly episode that comes out, we'll just say on Saturdays right now, that it's more of a news episode where we give you more up-to-date news and topics. Whereas these episodes, we go so far out and they're more on just regular topics. We actually cover more pertinent news and issues on those. So take a look out for those. Very small portion size compared to the 90 minutes usually too. So you get your little news in and go from there. So
yeah, and I'm sure we'll be doing more with that in the future as far as like announcing shows and album releases. But yeah, we'll try and bring the metal news on the last week on Earth.
Yep.
Yeah. Every Saturday, likely every Saturday, unless for any reason it's a slow news week or we just don't have the personal time for it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you should be seeing 3 to 4 of those a month.
Yeah. And of course, every Tuesday you'll see this podcast no matter what. So,
every Tuesday, because we worship on every Sunday.
Yes, we do. So, but with that being said, we are today, like I said, we were riding this Gojira train, and we had something else in the books, but we thought that would be a little excessive for the workload because we had to call an audible today anyway because we had something else planned, but that happens.
Yeah. But
you and I are always prepared. We have something in the tank.
Yeah.
So today we are going to actually rank Gojira albums.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a nice little workload to squeeze in these albums, but it's less amount of work than what we had talked about. Given the time frame, especially. So this is easy for me. I'll make it a super short episode for you, Jay. They're all tied for first. You may go. No, I love
Stop. Recording over.
I love this band so much. I revisited some of their work just last night. In fact, I just wanted to brush up on some of the albums I hadn't listened to as much. So that was a fun trip down history lane. I've been riding with this band forever. I keep bragging about it, like, oh, my band is popular. Oh my God! Like, I don't stop me from becoming like a modern day Metallica fan, please. Like, just take me out back and put me down when I start defending everything that they do, even if it's not good.
Yeah.
But no, so far so good. I love this band a lot. So this will be a fun episode for me. I'll talk about these guys until I turn blue in the face. Yeah, go ahead.
And this is one of those bands that you turned me on to. You bragged about for 2 or 3 years before I even gave him a spin. And I remember your first initial language on it was like, I don't know if you like this that much because they don't grind a lot. And I'm like, well, that's not all I like. But
yeah, I mean, I don't. They do here and there.
Here and there.
They grind. They grind. They're just not a grind core band or anything like that. So. But yeah, they got some slamming grooves, and they've got a lot of interesting sounds that they do on their guitar. I wouldn't call either of the guys like virtuosos or necessarily shredders or lead guitarists, but great songwriting and one of the best drummers in the world. So when you have that in the pocket, you don't really need to be the most outstanding guitarist. You just need to be able to write cool rhythms and cool songs, and they do an excellent job of that.
Yeah, so my 2 cents on that, just on the band in general, before we even start, when you did show them to me, I was like, this is heavy as shit. Like these guys are just a steamroller of a band.
Yeah.
Most of their material is heavy, just fucking roll you over.
Yeah.
Really, so it's funny because we just did the Sepultura episodes, and I swear on the second episode of that, we talked about how Gojira talked about Sepultura was such an influence of them.
Sure.
And after going back through a few of these records that I haven't even, the few older ones I didn't even listen to until we talked about doing this episode, but listening to some of the things in between, the different almost ethnic rhythms and polyrhythms and stuff they bring in between the songs, like to me that like screams Sepultura.
Sure.
Even a few riffs on some of their earlier stuff screams Sepultura.
Okay.
Another band that I would say like Machine Head, where it's just like heavy as shit in your face riffing.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about them not being virtuosos, but I would say like tight.
Super tight.
Your right hand sometimes, like as far as rhythms go, that speaks leaps and bounds over trying to do all this crazy sweep picking.
Yeah, sure.
Stuff. And these guys' right hands are the best in the business.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the way that they lock in with Mario on the drums is incredible. They and their live performance is a testament to that. Like they just sound pitch perfect. They just sound so locked in and so tight when you see them live. I did only see them the one time, but I also have like live DVD footage. I've seen other footage on YouTube. They're incredible. They're incredible live. So
when I got to see them live when we were supposed to go to that show,
it was 20 in a row.
Yeah, they were so badass, man. It was like one of the tightest bands that I've seen live, and I was just like,
I'm actually debating.
Oh my god, these guys are so good, dude.
They've got a date in Detroit and a date in Chicago, and those dates are like Friday, Saturday, and I'm just considering like that Chicago show. It would fall in. It's doable, but Korn is the headliner, so I'd have to get there like early enough. Can't just I'm gonna go catch the headliner and miss Gojira. Like I'm not going to see Korn. Like I'm going to see Gojira.
Right.
So I have to decide if that's a doable thing for me or not, because for me anymore, like when you got the family and other people need to like watch the kid and stuff, it feels super selfish to the point of, well, I don't even want to ask out of guilt. Like I'm just not going to put it on somebody.
Yeah.
But if I told somebody like, I really need to see this, it's been too long, maybe there'd be some understanding there.
And it might be worth waiting around a little bit for them, and maybe they come back with a different bill or something too, you know? So,
I mean,
not that Korn's not great or anything. It would be cool to see them again after so many years. But
I don't think I've seen them since Ozzy.
Yeah.
At Wing Stadium, just on the first album.
Oh, really?
That's it. Yeah. So that my Korn concert memory is pretty locked. Like that's tight.
Yeah.
Same with my
After
Slipknot.
the first album.
Yeah, that's it. Same with the Slipknot concerts I've been to. Like.
So yeah, after we right before we get into ranking these, I was able to go through all of them, and let's just say that there's a lot of great music here, man. These guys are so badass. I like them more every time I listen to them. But what I was gonna say was we had talked about on the news episode, just because it was in the news of them playing at the Olympics. Now they had the single that came out after the Fortitude, and that single was called, do you remember?
I'm not sure. What is it? I'd be surprised if I missed it, but I don't. Even my favorite band, I don't catch everything.
But see, the single itself. So you told me on the news podcast what the song was called in French.
Asaiha.
Yeah, and then that was what in English?
It'll be all right. It'll be okay. It'll be all right.
Okay. So I wasn't sure if that was the newest
song
single that they put out, and they just
Our Time Is Now is the current single.
Okay.
Wait, is it?
Okay. See, that's why I thought that single was actually what they performed at the Olympics, because it was the newest single.
But that says it's older.
So the Asaiha.
That is just like a French song that's been around forever.
Okay, so they covered something. All right, cool.
It was like I think even Lady Gaga had a hand in that. Like it shifted from Gojira and into some other stuff. Like, it was a whole performance, and they just had like a segment in it.
Oh,
That's why
okay.
it's not like a whole song.
Oh, okay, cool. That makes complete sense to me. I just was kind of putting that together, and I was like, So, with that being said, we're going to go from, of the 7 records they have, we'll start at number 7 and work our way to our number 1s.
Okay.
And I'll let you go first since this is one of your favorite bands, Mod.
Oh, wow. Thank you. So for me, and I did give these things a close listen, and it was hard. It was hard to make these kind of decisions because it's almost like you're saying, this album's not very good when you put it at the bottom of the list, but they're all great. I just had to compare them to themselves, to only the other 6.
Yep.
So
Yep, yeah, I'm the same. I'm right there with you.
yeah,
Where a few of them could trade places easily.
yeah,
But like especially my middle pack.
yeah,
I'm pretty solid with 7, and I'm pretty solid with 1.
yeah. Okay.
Maybe 2 could even flip back and forth. But like, man, that middle was tough. I'll tell you that. No middle of the road for these guys, to be honest.
So for me, I would say The Link is the album that sits at 7. It is a slight progression. It's their second album, but I feel like they hit something of a sophomore slump here. It didn't have the same raw energy and wild songwriting as their first album, Terra Incognita. I felt like they did rein in a lot of things on that album, almost to a detriment. You don't have some of the wild exploration in the riffage. The vocals are scaled back a little bit where he doesn't go like crazy with the overdubs on it. And I don't think there's as much melody there that they would later go on to develop. So they were kind of like in this middle of the road where they were coming off of a really wild album, which I think is awesome. But they scaled a lot of things back. You could see some of the foreshadowing of like From Mars to Sirius on the horizon. I could hear elements of that creeping in. I felt like the album was just missing a little punch somewhere. And I do like some songs on it, but just some things I just felt were kind of, just, they didn't really go anywhere for me. I didn't feel the same energy as Terra Incognita, and it didn't have the same wow factor as From Mars to Sirius. So for me, The Link, kind of the one I would recommend the least if we were going to start somewhere. Like, hey, if you want to check out this awesome band, Gojira. I don't know. I mean, I think it's got some good songs on it. The Death of Me, Remembrance, and especially the last track, which was Dawn, just an instrumental track. I thought Dawn was the best track on the album. It just needed some vocals on it. And then that would have been like probably my favorite song on it. But overall, Indians was another good one as well. But I felt like it was tough to compare to the 2 albums on either side of it, and probably my least favorite. But if somebody's going to throw it on, I'd be like, I'll bob my head to it. Like, I get it. I've heard it. I like it fine.
Yep.
But just in comparison to all the others, like, there's not enough melody and there wasn't enough punch. I felt like it kind of dragged. So I'm not trying to poo on it, but that's the reason it's at number 7. Yeah. And I do definitely speak to some of the songs that I liked on it. I already name dropped, but I just feel like it wasn't powerful enough.
Yeah.
And it left a lot of room for improvement. I could see like production was better. They reined in Joe's vocals a lot, to what you would get going forward. The drum work is phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
I just felt like there was probably a lack of melody and just kind of like they knew that they were going to refine their sound a little bit, and they'd make an amazing leap coming off of this album, I tell you what. But for me, one of these albums has got to be number 7, and today, as I sit here, I say it's The Link.
Okay.
What about you, Jay? Which one are you probably the least stoked on, even though they're all great? They're all tied for first.
And that's why I hate to... I'm in the same boat as you. So this album is number 7 for me, which is Magma.
Okay.
Not for the fact that it's not a great album.
Sure.
I feel like on Magma, after listening to it intentionally, the vocals were superb on it.
Yeah.
The songwriting is great on it.
Agreed.
There's just like 4 riffs that punch you in the nuts.
Yeah.
And all Gojira is below the belt punches all the time, just right in the nuts, just constantly. Like, oh my God, Jesus,
Yeah.
But Magma there was a few of them on there, but not enough for my taste.
Sure.
Not taking anything away from this album.
Right.
Because when we talked about this before we even did this episode, we were kind of talking about Magma and just giving, ranks that just throwing them out there, right?
Right.
But with Magma, after listening to it, it's way better than what I gave it credit for and thought it was.
Yeah.
And a lot of great things about it. Great rock, heavy, hard rock album almost.
Yeah, sure.
And a few metal riffs, and then they kind of add in some of that, that weird whammy stuff. And there was just a few riffs on there that were almost filler too. Like what?
Sure.
That was just kind of like wrote in like this weird harmonic riff in one of the songs. And I was just like, I don't know. It just seems to be, just didn't seem to be the Gojira that I've known to grow and love.
Yeah.
So for me, that's why that album 7, it's not a bad album. It's worth rocking. It's worth putting on again. It's worth listening to multiple times. It's just, like you said, something has to be 7. And for me, that one had to come in 7 because I felt like even their earlier work was a little raw in exploring their sound. This one is probably the furthest away from Gojira music as a whole. Yeah, for me.
No, I've got some comments on Magma when I get to it on my list. I can back you up a little bit on some of the things that are problematic about that album. Before I get to that, I will move into my number 6. Unless you had anything else you wanted to add to the Magma.
Nope.
Okay,
no, that's good.
Moving into my 6th best Gojira album would be their debut album, Terra Incognita. Now, I speak highly of this album, but that is also on the back of like the first 3 songs, maybe. And I feel like in those first 3 songs, I would still love to hear them live. I would have them in something of a rotation in their current live set list. I think we've got Clone, Lizard Skin, and Satan is a Lawyer. I mean, all 3 of these songs just kind of knocked me back. Like, whoa. Man, that's a good song. All 3 of them. I was like, this. I was just listening to it last night, like revisiting it, and I thought, the songs are familiar, but they really reminded me just, in fact, how heavy they could be and can be anytime. And I felt like after that, it does start to kind of wane for me on that album. That album it does kind of drop off a little bit after those first 3 songs. There's maybe like some of the problems that would go on the Link where there's just kind of like these riffs. Some of them are really good, but they don't make good songs.
Yeah.
And some of those songs get a little bit either drawn out or they are a little bit chaotic. This is where the songwriting is kind of the most exploratory, if you will. Like there's not as much structure or they're a little bit all over the place from one riff to the next.
Yep.
The vocals on this album are probably unlike any other Gojira album because you had Joe layering his vocals with the highs and the lows, and some of the vocals you never hear again other than this album.
Yeah,
like you never hear some of the stuff that's on Clone again. Like he really reached on that one to the degree of sounding like a deicide, and I was just like, oh my God, I forgot that this existed.
Yeah.
This is so fucking heavy. It's just one of the other problems with this album and kind of almost throughout all of their albums is the little instrumentals that they do. They kind of go nowhere for me. And I ask myself, like, I mean, I guess the album needed a break, but they don't really connect one song to the other. They're just kind of like this little break. And with the exception to like maybe From Mars to Sirius, most of those instrumentals don't really need to be on the album, unfortunately. But I get it. You want to break it up. We speak that all the time. You kind of want to have a little dip in the album to like pause, reset, give the ears a break. But a lot of them, they're a bit of a head scratch for me. But this album is raw. It does captivate. I just feel like after I've heard the first 3 songs that I've heard the album, and so therefore, it's at 6 for me. Those first 3 songs I'm gonna speak to all day. I listened to the whole thing last night though, and I made notes on every single song, but the ones that stood out to me are right off the top, and then after that, the album does just kind of like It feels like I've heard it already.
Yeah.
And they, not necessarily recycled riffs, but not as inspired as what they would go on to write. So for me, it falls at 6. I would definitely recommend it, but not first. I would say, yeah, once you start with these albums, go check out their other stuff. It's super heavy.
Right.
It just kind of lacks in melody and definitely lacks in songwriting, just in terms of a good cohesive structure, which they would definitely go on to formulate their personal structure, which is akin to like Death, where you've got that verse chorus or verse pre-chorus chorus, throw a bridge in there, and then repeat the song and then maybe an outro. So they do have their formula that they developed over time. It wasn't quite there on their first album, but I still think it slaps enough to own it, show it off, and put it on every now and again. But yeah, it still falls for 6 for me. Those older albums, you could tell they were still coming into their own, and they were developing their sound. A lot of those elements that make Gojira what we know today existed on the first 2 albums.
Yes, for sure.
But they would just find better uses of those sounds and create more sounds, unique, distinct sounds of Gojira as time would go on. But it does fall for 6 for me. Jay, what have you got at number 6?
So number 6 for me is The Link.
Okay.
For me, the album just kind of droned on and on. Like there was nothing that really caught me, whereas some of their other stuff, it really catches you and you really are intently listening. Like, oh man, that's cool. That's a cool riff. That's a cool. With The Link, there was very, very few and far between things on there that did that for me.
Right.
And I felt like you said, it was a sophomore slump where they were kind of like, well, what do we do here? And you could see some of the shades of going into the next record from this and some of the shades from the record before this, but it seemed like it was a little bit not cohesive. It seemed like it was a little all over the place, where they were just trying to jam a lot of stuff into a small 47 minutes or 53 minutes or however long it is,
Yeah.
But nothing on The Link really was like, hey, listen to this again. Hey, so it's not that it was bad, but for me, it was probably the only reason why Magma, I think, took 7 is because it wasn't, like, The Link is still heavier.
Yeah.
So that just kind of bumped it up the list for me, but it could still, both of those could probably be interchangeable, just because Magma has great songwriting, but The Link itself still seemed like there was something was just amiss there for me.
Yeah, it did kind of drone on, and it felt like it was like a tempered anger. Like, there's some anger, there's some moodiness in there, and there's some darkness going on in there. I just felt like it kind of dragged in the pace and the tempo of the album. There might be some grinds on there, but there was nothing so, like, middle of the road, like, kind of upbeat and just like, oh, man, that smashes. It's heavy, and it's got, like, some energy in it. They had a lot of groove on it, but, again, I see where you're coming from. I felt like it lacked certain things, and to me, it's a curiosity among their albums, because, like I said, on either side of it, you got pretty good albums.
Yeah.
And especially the leap that they would make coming off of that.
Yep.
I think that the reason it feels like it's lacking is because they were probably dialing in their sound a little bit and hadn't quite gotten to where they wanted to be. And it was just kind of a necessary evolution. And they would definitely go on to really dial that in after The Link. But yeah, it is missing something. And it is hard to say exactly what.
The Link.
Yeah.
The missing link.
It's missing the link, to greatness. But I mean,
or it is the link to greatness.
Either way,
so
it makes a lot of sense. For me, and we did just talk a little bit about this album. My number 5 album in the Gojira catalog will be Magma.
Okay.
Again, this is another instance of the band having a really great album on the first half, and then on the back end, it really tapers off. They definitely streamlined the songwriting by this point a lot, and they had already had that kind of going for them. But also the vocals, they really brought in, like, Joe's clean vocals a lot, and they have a lot of soaring choruses. I know the singles off of that album were fire. I love them, and they've got The Cell on there as well. But the album, you can tell what you're going to get just from track 1. It's a really slow opening, Shooting Star. There's a lot of groove, a lot of clean vocals, and just a lot of atmosphere. But once you get past the second half, once you get into like maybe the title track, then you've got a couple more songs after that, like 4 more after that, and like they don't stand out versus the first half of the album. So for me, it's half of a really good album, and then another half where it's like, they're probably never going to play them songs live. And they do have a couple of slapping riffs on the back end, but again, and I said it just a minute ago, great riffs don't make great songs. And you can have some punches in the face, but that doesn't mean that everything else around it is good. Some of those riffs do sound a little bit filler or uninspired.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like
man.
you just need to have 8 songs on the album and not 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if these days you could probably get away with it. You drop EPs all day if you want. Like if you just got 5 bangers, do that.
The first half. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you were like to sit there and say like, these last 4 need some more work, or I want to break these up because this riff I really like, but then we've got 2 or 3 attached to it that aren't as powerful. So I think that's where the album suffers. And again, I got another instance of an instrumental that doesn't really fit with Yellowstone preceding the title track Magma. I do love the title track. But yeah, the Yellowstone is just like this bass groove that I'm thinking Joe wrote while he was spending time in Cavalera Conspiracy or something. He had played bass for them.
Oh, did he?
Especially around that time, I think. So maybe he wrote himself a really cool bass lick. I don't know who the songwriter is for that one, but I imagine it's Joe all day. It's so similarly like great songwriting, great use of like Joe's vocals, especially on choruses. There's an excessive amount of clean singing on this. Yes. And Joe's not a bad clean singer at all. I just miss some of those really heavy lows and highs that he can get to on his fry vocal. But I mean,
felt that his clean vocals were probably the best they've ever been on this record, though.
Sure. Agreed.
He really dialed that in.
Yeah, they did a great job producing his clean vocal sound in that album. And the choruses really do soar through and through. Like, all of these songs have a really, like, simple guitar rhythm for a chorus, if you will, to allow Joe to reach for those vocals.
Yep.
And on that front, I say it's a great album. Some of their best choruses exist on this album. It's just overall, like, I would want a little bit more in the heaviness or the riff department. And some of the heavy riffs on this album almost feel uninspired. That is part of the problem. Like, they have heaviness on the album, but some of it is just kind of like, it's just kind of chuggy, but it doesn't have the unique factor that I look for in some of their music.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's why it sits at 5 for me. Not a bad album. I enjoyed it when it came out. I just think that I wore thin on it quickly. Like, it didn't stick with me. Like, some of their stuff, not only was it great, but I was like obsessed with it for a real long time. And then by the time Magma dropped, and I'd listen to it a few times, I would sit to myself and go, okay, like, it fell off, and I found myself kind of repeating that thought, like, it kind of fell off on the back end, and I still do feel that way, having revisited it last night, just to be sure of my feelings of it and how I was going to rank it compared to their other work. Same, still, like, start strong, and then, just expect it to kind of fall. There's some heavy songs on the back end, but they're not catchy heavy.
Yeah.
So that's part of the problem for me.
And then sometimes, even throughout all of their records, alluding back to what you said about sometimes them little instrumental things are out of place. So with an album like Magma, there's a few things on there like that, like you said, and then it already doesn't have a lot of momentum, and then you break it up even more with some weird 2-minute montage of whatever little funny riff you found cool tapping. It's not that it's bad, it's just like, where did that come from? But they have been doing that since the beginning. Their sound has been there the whole time. It's just them expressing it more and exploring it more. All the way through Magma.
I mean, it would be a great gateway album maybe for people that are just finding metal. And if you're just discovering Gojira hot off the Olympics, not a bad place to start if you're not into metal already.
Right.
But if you're one of those kids that, you'd only been listening to maybe something kind of heavy from the mainstream, but you've never heard of Gojira, and then you saw this, and you're like, oh my God, that's the heaviest thing ever. I might recommend something other than that to you. But if you if you're familiar with metal and you don't want to go too heavy with it, great place to start. Really just got some sing-song choruses and something that people can appreciate, and it's not like overbearing and in your face.
Yeah, for sure.
So Jay, that was my, what was it?
Fifth.
5? Yeah, so
Yep.
I think we're up to you at number 5.
So number 5 for me is Terra Incognita.
Okay.
Loved this album though. Didn't hear it until basically last night or the day before, whatever it was when I listened to it Friday. And absolutely love this record.
Sure.
It's pummeling. It's heavy as shit. It's everything I want in music.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a little grind in there, a little more than normal.
Yep.
But yeah, just so many great riffs on there, just heavy as shit. You could tell it was a little raw, not from just a production standpoint. The production itself actually doesn't even sound that bad for a 2001 effort. But that has a lot to say about their musicianship as well, just because they're so good
always
at
been
what
tight.
they do.
Yep, always been tight.
You're going to translate well on record, even if it's not the most polished produced record, right? But yeah, man, I can't say enough good things about this. I do agree with you as well, though. Like kind of towards the last half, it kind of trails off, and then there's a little bit of something where he's trying clean vocals on there because he tries clean vocals from the very beginning.
Yep.
I mean, and those just kind of were like one of those. It was one of those metalcore, late 2000, early 2000s moments where it's like, what the fuck is that? Like that doesn't sound good. Sorry, bro. Like, I know you're trying to clean sing.
Yeah.
Later on, he's developed that all the way.
Yep.
Like he's become very good at that, and I commend him for trying and just putting your voice out there. But on this album, it's like really heavy death metal, and then we get to this section where he's starting to do this like clean and tapping, and then he does like some weird clean vocal, and I'm just like, man, he kind of threw a whole wrench in that fucking system for me. But love this record, actually. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to, because usually when you start someone's discography at the very beginning, you're going to get the rawest, most unpolished, not having years of experience on stage or in the studio or writing. That's what you're getting right off of whatever you knew in 2001 compared to what we're talking about now, right? But
and sometimes those first albums can be like the best album that a band ever drops, right? Some people get stuck on that first album.
Yeah.
Like for me, albums of that would be like Korn's self-titled.
Yeah.
Slipknot self-titled, like those still to me, like they never really outdid that.
For me, the Faceless, the first one.
Yeah, and so, and some fans, they just were like, oh, I wanted more of that first album, but the band kind of grew and went another way, whatever, it's fine. And some fans of those bands are going to say, no, they went on to better things for sure, you know. And for me, Gojira is one of those bands where the first album's great, but they did go on to better things, whereas other bands I've heard, I liked the one album, and then they kind of veered off into a direction that I was like, nah, it's not what I needed or wanted. So, but yeah, so Terra Incognita.
Yeah, that's about all I had to say about that, because you covered a lot of good stuff with it.
Yeah.
But I do want to just say that it is at 5. It could be at 4. Might even be able to be, it'd probably be as high as 4 on my list.
Yeah.
But when you just got to pick somewhere, I'm just picking 5 for this, but it is a cool record.
Yeah.
It is very cool, like, especially if you're a death metal fan and you listen to Magma and you're like, I don't really like Gojira. Well, listen to Terra Incognita and then just see the growth and difference of what the band actually has accomplished.
Yeah,
to me.
I mean, if you weren't high on some Gojira, and I've seen some people call them, oh, that's starter metal, and that's fair. That's like, it's one of the heaviest gateway bands if we're calling them that. But yeah, you can go back in time, and
I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, you got
bullshit.
You got a few other bands to go through before you get to the heaviness of Gojira. I'm sorry, they're accessible, but some of that early stuff is, off the charts in terms of heaviness. And yeah. I mean, the top 3 are probably going to be all kind of interchangeable, but before we get to that, I'll move into my number 4.
Yep, go right ahead, buddy.
And for me, that album is going to be Fortitude, their most recent release.
Gang Violence.
I really do like this album a lot. I feel like it was a bit of a rebound from Magma, but at the same time, it does kind of pick up from where Magma left off in ways. They just do a better job of it and making it catchy and interesting. And there's some new things on here, like the title track is an instrumental. Maybe it had some chanting vocals in it, but then they move into the chant, which to me it felt like that all should have just been one song. That's one of the instances in which they really succeed on an instrumental track.
Yeah.
They write a really great melody in
Fortitude.
Thank you. and then it just segues almost seamlessly into the chant.
The heavy, and then it kicks in heavy too.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah, so a really good, like, just middle section of the album right there, and it's surrounded on both sides by even more great music.
Mm-hmm.
You got the singles up front. You've got, Born for One Thing and Another World. Another World, I think, was the first drop, and we didn't even know if it was going to be on the album at the time that it dropped.
Okay. It was like a single or something they dropped beforehand or
Yep.
whatever.
And I didn't even know that they stated, like, hey, this is going to be on the new album. I feel like it was one that they just kind of had lying around, and they wanted to get something out there. And I think we're talking about, like, just coming off of the pandemic, because I believe the album is 2022.
2021.
Is it?
Actually, yeah.
Okay, so
might be late 2021.
right.
I just have the record company, and that was Roadrunner, but and the dates here 2021. Yeah.
Sure. But when I heard it, and I kind of like had this like hangover from Magma, I was like, kind of bored of my favorite band, because their most recent album has a handful of good songs on it, and they're not their best songs. None of those songs jumped out at me and said, that's my new favorite Gojira song.
Right.
But excuse me. Yeah. I heard that song. Oh God, I'm sorry, Jason. I'm trying to Google their albums just to have them in chronological order. But
you're all good.
So when I heard not Born for One Thing, Another World, I was like, welcome back, Gojira. I loved it. It was like, then I felt like Gojira was back.
Yeah.
And then when the album dropped, you got Born for One Thing to start it out, just right into the heaviness. Amazonia was a good song too.
Yep, that's a cool song.
I actually liked Hold On. Is that the one where or was it Newfound, where he starts out with I've been grinding and grinding? I love that.
Yeah.
So it's got some new stuff on it. I think they did a really good job with atmosphere, melody. The choruses, again, like Magma, they soar. I think you've got more consistency in the heaviness on this album.
Yeah.
And like more interesting heavy riffs.
Mm-hmm.
When you get all the way out to the Sphinx, I feel like we're reaching back in time to like The Way of All Flesh or From Mars to Sirius, because not only is it heavy, it's not just heavy for the sake of it. It's a heavy and good song, and I love that song. Just a better album than Magma in a lot of ways. I like it. It stays strong going out.
Yep.
The Traits could have been the end of the album for me. I liked what they did there. The last song, Grind, that was a little bit lackluster on the first half of the song, but then when it gets into like the second half or going out to the end, I could see why they wanted to end the album on that note.
Yeah.
I feel like they could have ended it on the Traits, but the Grind has a really cool like chord arpeggio riff that they just repeat and then they build on, and it makes a really good outro to the album.
Yep.
But everything on this album, from the singles to the title track, moving out to like the heaviest song on the album, the Sphinx, and then to the last two, which are very melodic, I just felt like a much better effort. A lot of tribal themes on it with the percussion.
Yep.
And, the vocals, awesome. I just feel like I want them to still kind of go back to some of the songwriting from the middle of the pack albums, but we'll see what they do. They're definitely due for a new album sometime in 2025, I hope. It's been some years.
Yeah, their clips looks between 3 to 4 years apiece between albums. So
yeah, I mean, and I get that because they write some complicated music for sure. Like when you got that drummer, and he's going to bring to the table like, hey, I've got this beat I want to use. He must do this a lot to them. They must suffer a little bit for it, because he'll come out with something where you're like, God, what is happening right now? Like the accents are all weird and off, but and it's as fast as a grind, something between a grind and some kind of trot, but he's just like got this weird, accent going on, and you're like, that's going to be hard to write to. Thankfully, his brother's in the band, who probably has like a next level connection with the guy psychically.
Yeah, I mean, that's why that right hand and that kick drum's so tight all the time.
But
it's just like,
then you've got
the hell?
You've got the other guitarist. He's got to learn it too. And I'm like, oh my God, these guys are next level with their musicianship, especially in terms of rhythm. But yeah, number 4 for me, Fortitude. Great album, really strong comeback from the Magma album, and I definitely highly recommend it to anybody who also is just now discovering Gojira, hot off the Olympics. I think you'll find a good blend of everything that they've ever offered on this album, from that chunky, heavy rhythm, sounds like a train just barreling down the tracks on you, to the soaring highs of the choruses and the melody that they offer with Joe's vocals, and just the all-around atmosphere of writing like somewhere between a heavy metal song and a hard rock song.
Right.
Like, they do a great job of that in these last couple of albums. What about you, Jay? Where's 4 for you? What is 4 for you?
4 is actually Fortitude for
Okay.
me as well.
Makes sense.
So I could have probably, like I said, could have switched out with Terra. Just because of the rawness, but I really enjoyed Fortitude. This was one I did have to go back and listen to again.
Sure.
But as soon as I did, a lot of it came calling back, like, oh, I must have listened to this more than I thought it did when it came out. So a lot of the riffs were familiar. I feel like this is just the culmination of everything they've done in all of their albums, and it's a good kind of like, not that they're done, but just a good, bow on the present, where this is everything we've done, and I felt like they put everything into Fortitude that they have done, but they were able to not only continue to write great songs like they did with Magma, they were able to bring back that heaviness that a lot of people that are fans of Gojira would rather hear than some stuff like Magma. You know what I mean? Because there was just some parts on Magma, but after that, they could have really went downhill and really just started writing rock songs after that.
Yeah.
So with Fortitude, at least they're like, oh yeah, we're still heavy as shit. We still play double bass. We still have a lot of chunkiness left in the canon. So for me, great album though too. I mean, the songs were written well, melody's awesome, a lot of great tracks. I felt like the filler tracks on this one weren't as not needed as maybe as some of the other ones that they did, or like kind of where does that come from? It's just kind of in there. It doesn't really, some of their stuff flows into other songs, and some of it's just like, here's a piece of music with some of the weird rhythms and tribal weird stuff, but with like the callback to Sepultura or something like that. But Fortitude, great album, but it is number 4 for me too, like kind of right in the middle of the road.
Yeah. It's once we get into these top 3 albums, there's a clear distinction in their catalog from the last 2 and their first 2 to the meat of the band. And we're just about to jump into that. And I think, fans are going to clamor for more material that sounds like these middle 3 albums. And it's just a matter of like, do they want to try to continue to write that style? Because a lot of times you're just only going forward, right?
Yeah.
There's no going back. For me, number 3 on my list, and these are almost interchangeable, but number 3 for me is going to be The Way of All Flesh. Now, this is the second album that I ever encountered, really, by Gojira. I might have been familiar with the first 2, but I was really high on From Mars to Sirius, which we'll obviously get to in a minute. But The Way of All Flesh does have, like, one of my favorite songs by Gojira, and that is the title track. The very last, what a strong ending to an album. Just the vocal on that, like during the chorus, was totally unique to me at the time for what Joe had been doing leading up to that. And I just felt like I could almost feel like my soul leaving my body during that song. It's such a great song. The Art of Dying, another one. You got like this 9-minute opus track. It's got like 2 minutes of just percussion and like open notes on the guitar, just driving, just barreling down the tracks. Ouroboros, one of the coolest songs they've written also. I just feel like there's not really a problem with this album other than it is an instance of a really good album having a couple of filler tracks on it for me that I'm going to constantly skip. And it's because I've heard them, and they don't have the soaring choruses, and they're kind of like heavy for the sake of being heavy, but they weren't like super catchy heavy riffs. You do have some of the heavy. It is one of their heaviest albums, like bar none. Like up against the old ones, up against the new ones, it's just crushingly heavy. Just the problem for me is some of those songs, like after I've heard them a couple of times, I'm like, it didn't bring melody. It didn't really bring like a catchy heaviness to it. It was just like heavy on the drums and very percussive, and Joe's vocals are pretty much as low as they get throughout this album. Like he's reaching for a lot of that guttural.
Yeah.
I felt like Vacuity was maybe not the best choice for the first single. It was a pretty good song, but I felt like it didn't hold up to some of the songs from Mars to Sirius. I was a little bit curious about it, but they've got was it A Sight to Behold? Very unique. He's got like that harmonizer on his vocal.
Yeah.
And I'd mentioned Ouroboros. It's got that tapping riff that just starts the album out. I'm like, what a strong riff to start your album on. Yama's Messenger, super heavy, kind of reminded me of Morbid Angel.
Mm-hmm.
But end of the day, and it was, for a long time, it was my favorite album until I realized, like, I listened to about half of it at a time, maybe 3/4 of it, and then I do skip several songs consistently. They don't. It could have been a shorter album.
Yeah.
It could have been 8 songs, and it would be perfect. And then maybe this conversation would be different. Right. Maybe I would be saying it's 1 or 2, but for the simple fact that it's got some songs on it that, they could have been B-sides. They could have been unreleased. They could have tweaked and polished them a little bit more.
Yeah.
It's going to sit at number 3 for me. Great album. God, the title track though, I do wish, just for the sake of ease, that it didn't exist in an era of where they did the hidden track BS.
Oh,
because like it's a 17-minute long track, but the song is only like 5 to 6 minutes.
Yeah,
and then you got like, why did we do it?
Yeah. Why did
we do this?
Yeah,
why did we do this? And then you got 10 minutes of silence, and then I can't
use that whole CD up. That's why you did it, so you could use the whole CD.
And God help me, I cannot recall what even that hidden track sounds like. I don't think I like reached for brushing back up on that. I don't even remember what is at the end of that CD now. That's going to be a question mark after today's episode. I'm going to like immediately go and revisit that. But the last song is for sure one of the best Gojira songs in the catalog, even if this album comes in at a modest ranking of number 3 for me. That song alone could be a top 5 Gojira song of all time. And I definitely recommend that one immediately. Like, go revisit that song because it's perfect to me.
All right.
Jay, what do you got for number 3 in
your
for
number
list?
3, it looks like we're probably going to agree on number 1, I imagine. But
we'll see.
Number 3 for me is From Mars to Sirius. Great record. I felt like this is where Gojira became Gojira almost. This is like, we're here. We're just steamrolling your ass. Like the stuff they were singing about on this was very meaningful and really meant something. You could tell they really hit their stride during this record.
Yeah.
Heavy as shit. I mean, everything that we've said about Gojira, it's on this record, but it's to a point where it's polished and we're finally getting our sound. Whereas the first 2 records, I felt like we're kind of just trudging through. We want to write heavy music, but the songwriting isn't there yet. We haven't explored the singing, and I felt like this is where things really started to come into fruition for them. I love From Mars to Sirius. Again, another record, when I put it on, I was like, oh, I must have listened to this a lot more than I thought I did because it was recognizable and catchy, and there was a lot of parts to it that I absolutely loved. Another one that I probably should listen to a little bit more just because I've jammed the number 1 and number 2 that we're going to speak about so many damn times.
Sure.
This one kind of got lost in the fold, but I did listen to it a lot more than I thought I did. But what a great record. It's my number 3, and I'm assuming that since I kind of know what your number 1 is from the 2 episodes or few episodes we did before about the top.
If you've been paying attention,
unless
I flip flop,
unless you flop on me, but I didn't see that happening, or else you would have brought this album out. So, you can speak on it a little bit because I'm assuming this is going to be your number 2. But great fucking record, man. So awesome. I love the cover too. Badass on the cover, like it just says a lot, and fucking awesome record, man.
So. Yeah, this is my number 2 album from Gojira, From Mars to Sirius, and I know a lot of people will probably scratch their heads at both of us for not having this as their number 1 album, and I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, a little backstory on it. At the time I discovered this band, I was really like just kind of separating from the grind and the heavy death metal, and I'd already heard all of this stuff, like so much of my life, coming from like 94, 95, when you discover that stuff as a kid. Now we're out to like 2006. I'm 11 years into listening to metal, like the heaviest of metal. I've been listening to metal before that with Anthrax and Metallica and Megadeth, like 1990. So I'm just like a 9, 10-year-old kid at this point, like jamming metal. Like I look at my daughter and I think it's a little bit heavy. Like if I think about being that age and listening to metal.
Right.
But then, so now I'm listening to like the world's extreme heavy metal all the time, and I'm kind of at a phase in my life where it needs to be something different. I don't mind it heavy, but I just can't like slog through an all-day grind, brutal death metal album at this point. I'm just kind of like nothing new.
Yeah.
Well, I'm walking around the store, and kids, if you will, imagine a store where there's CDs for sale. They don't do that anymore. Aisles and aisles of it, A through Z. You got all kinds. You can sweep through. Like, look at this one, and at this time, I'm into like hard rock music, and I see this album cover. It just kind of speaks to me, and then I'm like, oh, this looks like maybe like some kind of stoner metal thing, like Caius. Like I might be into this. This is kind of screaming to me, like this flying whale on this like kind of gray, white, beige, cover with some planets and a moon, and I'm just like, what is this? And I pick it up, and it's got one of these little stickers on the cellophane packaging, and it says, rated Kerrang's #1 metal album of the year. I'm like, fuck, this is a metal album, you say? Well, we'll see about that. And now it's like fucking challenge accepted, right? Like I have to buy it now. I didn't even think it doesn't look metal.
Yeah.
It really doesn't. There's no skulls, there's no flames, there's no devils, there's no bones. It's just a flying whale with a planet, and it looks really neat. I'm like, what are they from Japan? Gojira.
Right.
Like the even the band logo doesn't look heavy. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I am just made of questions. I have got to figure out what is on this thing. And man, I'm telling you, as soon as I press play on this bad boy, and that first riff just steamrolls you. Ocean Planet, I think it is. Yep. Oh, my God. I was immediately a fan, and I didn't even know how much of a fan I was going to become, obviously, but just one song to the next and the next and the next. Every song on this album is basically like a 5 out of 5 star rating for me. Maybe the second song is the only one, I think, is Backbone, where I'm like, okay, that one's pretty good. It's kind of hard to follow up Ocean Planet, but I made sure to like just, I've listened to it so many times. I made sure to just kind of skim through it last night and make sure that I was certain on where I was putting it on this list and why I was putting it at number 2. It's a great album. It's still a little bit raw in ways. One of the things about it is that you've got about 5 or 6 8-minute songs on it. And for the average listener, that's a long haul.
Yeah, it's a lot, man.
The title tracks are From Mars, and then Too Serious is a separate track.
Yeah.
But it's basically one track.
Yeah.
And when you add those together, that's an 8-minute track.
Because it's like slow at the beginning.
Yep.
Then it gets heavy.
Into the second.
Too Serious.
Yeah. To the second portion of it. So that alone makes listening to this album a little bit difficult for some at the end of the day. It's like a 60-minute piece.
Yeah.
And like I said, 4 or 5, 6, maybe 8-minute tracks on it. Then the rest of them are clocking in at 4.5 to 5 minutes. So even those are on the longer end. That's not really much of a deterrent when the music is good.
Yeah.
It takes you on a journey.
Yeah.
I listened to this thing, and I was immediately brought back to the time in my life when I discovered this, and the nostalgia washed over me. And I was like, how is this not my number 1? And there's a reason it's not number 1, and that's just because what we're about to get into, I'm sure in a minute, but for me, it's kind of like kicking the door in. We're here, world, and it is a genius, masterful album, front to back. Not a bad track on it whatsoever. I love it. I would love to see them do some sort of anniversary tour where they play only songs from this album or the bulk of this album.
Maybe next year.
Yeah.
20 years next year.
Yeah, I mean, do that. That would be amazing. I don't know if they're that type of band or again, a lot of times, it's only going forward as stated before. Sometimes you just only go forward, and that's fine too. I think a lot of bands do. It's popular to go back and say, yeah, we're going to do the reunion thing or do the anniversary thing.
Right.
And if they did that for this, I would just have to be out there no matter what. But it's a perfect album for me. and I'll tell you why it's not number one when I get to my number one. But Jay, in the meantime, tell me about your number two.
Well, my number two was your number three, and that is The Way of All Flesh.
Okay.
So we kind of just flip. We have a lot of flip-floppers.
Yep.
For us. Main reason why almost goes back to what you're saying with From Mars to Sirius. It's like that nostalgia thing when I put it on, or I remember when you told me about it, and I went and bought it, and then I was just like, man, this record is fucking heavy.
Yeah.
And then later on down the line to realize how great the production was on it, and it was produced by Logan and Logan Mader, who was in
the Logan.
From Machine Head, and just everything about it. You said there's a few bad tracks that you skip on here. I never skip anything.
Okay.
I love the album front to back. I mean, back to front, front to back.
Yeah.
Great album. And that's all I can say about it. You said everything else that needs to be said about it. It's heavy as shit.
Yeah.
It gives me, but it's not so over the top heavy that it's inaudible or like crazy grindy or anything like that. It's just a good record, good songs, and they really showed. I almost felt like this might be the pinnacle of, well, I don't want to say that because the pinnacle of their heaviness probably was Terra Incognita, but I would say the polished heaviness of what they are, the tightness, the polished heaviness, come in with great production and just great songwriting all together. So number two, The Way of All Flesh, it just speaks to me in every which way from a nostalgia standpoint, from this being my first Gojira album that I owned that really got me into the band after it was recommended by you, and it is just heavy as shit. Just as soon as it starts, it's just like in your face, but not like death metal heavy, but like more just low end nut punch heavy, like I alluded to earlier.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Terra Incognita, this might be their heaviest album. Just and some of the best production in the catalog, right? So I love it. I'm happy that you got on board with it and like decided, like after giving it an intentional listen along the way, that it was a band that you could enjoy, because it's a great feeling when you can recommend a band to somebody and they're like, yeah, I vibe with that. Like that is for me too, man. Thank you for the heads up.
Yeah.
Some people, you know, you recommend something to them and they're like, missed the mark. That's not for me, dude. And that's kind of like bummer, because now I can't share that with you. I can't experience that with you.
And you like it that much. So it's hard to like when someone's like, yeah, I don't really like that at all, or that's not for me. You're just kind of like, well, who the fuck are you? Because that's for me.
The cool thing about Gojira, when you're looking at the catalog laid out here, it's like, it's got enough heavy for people that like the heaviest of heavy music. And then it's got, especially as you get into the more recent catalog, some of the best songwriting with great choruses for people that don't need it to be like The Way of All Flesh or Terra Incognita heavy. And those choruses have kind of almost always exist when you look back. Like those sing-song choruses were kind of almost existed from the beginning in ways, but they really just polished those ideas as time went on. You know, From Mars to Sirius for me was a very progressive album, like, and that's evident in like 8-minute long tracks where you can have a melody or a theme in a song and then carry it over to a bridge, and that can go on for 2 minutes at length or more. And then you might bring it back or you might taper it out, but just really long songs. The thing that they did well with their number one album for me, L'Enfant Sauvage, was they scaled some of that back. And so you didn't have super long songs to trudge through. Things are now like 4.5 to 6 minutes length, and they feel way more listenable. Another instance of this band putting out an album with no skipping tracks. I could just put this on and let it ride. It does have several of my favorite Gojira songs of all time on it. Just off the top of my head, The Gift of Guilt, Mouth of Kala, Born in Winter, I was gonna name drop another one, but anyway, every single song on this is perfect for me, and I made sure to like cruise through it last night, just kind of skim, make sure I wasn't mistaking myself into thinking it's the best album that they've got. To me, it is their crowning achievement. It's everything that they've ever done in their career, but to the best level that they could do it. You've got some of the most heavy, catchy riffs. You've got that really weird kind of drone, almost semi-clean, almost clean tone, but just dark and eerie that exists on a couple of the tracks. It's just so moody. The heavy riffs on here are super interesting. They do a lot with some of those like harmonizer whammy effects here and there on that album.
Yeah,
but
they
it's
started to get into that on this. Yeah,
but they didn't do it to like an obnoxious degree or like too much or just doing it for the sake of doing it. I went through this album just to make sure there was no skipping tracks on it, and sure enough, there's not one track to be skipped on this album, not one filler track on here. The Fall, maybe not their best closer for an album, nonetheless, still a good song. Don't hate on it at all. I just felt like maybe that would be the only one where I might just stop short of The Fall, but I'll probably just let it roll just because it's a good song as well. Born in Winter, probably one of my favorite songs by them. Such an interesting riff to start the song. And
so there must be like 2 unreleased tracks or something?
There may be.
Because The Emptiness and My Last Creation what I'm looking on were 2 songs after The Fall. But that's 13 songs, and I don't remember there being 13 songs. Is there 13 songs?
No.
So there must be a couple.
There's 11. Yeah, they must have like a re-release or something, but it definitely ends with The Fall. But yeah, all right, so I've got Planned Obsolescence, Liquid Fire. All of these are good. The Wild Healer was one of their more interesting instrumental pieces. I really enjoyed that. It's one of those tap rhythms that they just do for like 2 minutes on end.
Super cool one too.
Yeah, like it starts out with Explosia. And I think that has one of those really eerie, droning kind of clean riffs over the top of like a super heavy, chuggy riff.
Yep, that is so badass.
I think it's one of the songs that got me into this album. Now, this is an album, because I was such a fan of the previous 2 albums, now I'm filled with like anxiety and trepidation. Like, could they possibly outdo themselves? Could they possibly be as good as From Mars to Sirius or The Way of All Flesh? Like, there's no way they can have a third album be better than the last. Like, they just can't be better than what they've already been doing. At this point, I'm kind of like, we'll see. And I had heard the singles kind of cross my path a little bit, and I might have waited almost a full calendar year on this, maybe 6 months to a year, but I finally just, and again, we're also talking about a time in my life where I wasn't made of money by any stretch. I mean, slinging DVDs like as a part-timer was not making money.
Right.
So like buying CDs, even today is almost like a tall order for some people. Like, I'm not dropping $15 on a CD. What is that?
Right.
Like I got Spotify. I don't need, a CD. As you can see, I still love buying my CDs. And at the time, I had to be very selective about buying an album, and I was already pretty happy with my Gojira collection at the time. But when I finally did buy it and I listened to it with intention, front to back, I thought to myself, I don't know why I've been waiting on this. Like, this is amazing. So to me, it is the quintessential pinnacle crowning achievement of Gojira. Production, songwriting, vocals, heavy riffs, melody, groove. It all exists on this album. I want another one. I want a part 2. I think the last 2 albums are good to really good, but the uniqueness and the heaviness and the catchiness of the middle 3 albums, it seems to kind of wane with the last 2, and I want that back. And I felt like it was almost coming back to me with Fortitude, but I don't know what to say to it. Like, it is a good album, but just something about the songwriting and the uniqueness of the riffs and the catchiness of the riffs on this album speak to me the most in their catalog. And again, just banger for banger, 5 stars across the board. Jay, how do you feel about this album?
So it's number 1 for me as well.
Yeah.
You got to pick one and you got to pick number 7, but this one made it all the way to the top. And I think the reason why is because it was The Way of All Flesh, but just even kicked up another notch.
Okay.
Whereas they were able to take that songwriting and a lot of that melody and layer in some different aspects of their music, but still keep that balls behind it, and they still keep that heaviness behind it. And I know this album, when I first listened to it, it just comes out rolling like a steamroller and just good song after good song. And I remember other people getting into Gojira at this time too, because they're really starting to come into the popular, or wouldn't even say popular, but coming into like the average metalhead's ear, you know?
Yeah.
Because I remember other people talking about this record that I wouldn't even know that they actually like Gojira, and they're like, "You heard that new Gojira?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's really badass." And I remember at the time I had a CD player, and I'd put the CD in, I just like listen to it over and over and over. And I don't usually do that.
Sure.
So I'm usually good on one listen, and maybe I'll come back in a month or two. But I remember this album being so good that I just kept listening to it over and over and over, and I was just like, this is badass. This is heavy.
Yeah.
I want to write shit like Gojira. When I say that about a band, that's when I like, okay, they've moved to another echelon in my respect level, because if I wish I wrote that, then your band is awesome.
Yeah.
And with Gojira, I just want to say this about Gojira as a whole. There's some the drummer, bad at Mario, right? His name, yeah. So top-notch drummer. I mean, these guys are all great musicians, all so good at what they do. But a lot of the times when you listen to Gojira, their complexity, it's not like it's technical metal. They have this way about them of making an easy riff almost sound great. And that's the hardest thing to do in music, I think. Like, you can write this technical, crazy shit, and it's going to sound interesting because you're playing all these notes and you're playing a million miles a minute, right? And you're going all over the place, and you're like, as a musician, you're like, oh, wow, that's cool. But being able to just do some chuggy triplet riff that may almost sound like something you've heard before, but not, and it's their own thing. Being able to do that and write something interesting with them chuggy, because they have a lot of chuggies, man. Like, just that heavy palm muted right hand, right? I mean, and being able to do that, that's a skill within itself, to take something that's almost not that complex, but make it sound so amazing. And that's what I love about Gojira. They're one of those bands that do that for me, where it's sometimes it may not be that complex.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where they fall short on Magma, where they almost everything goes so on complex at times, where it's like almost filler. Like, wait, that's like, if the drums were doing something a little more interesting there over that riff, maybe that would be cool.
Yeah.
But unlike this L'Enfant Sauvage, that everything about it is just top notch, front to back, all the notes, the song selection. Like you said, that one, like that is so fucking cool, man.
It haunts.
And also, what I love about music is when I look at the CD cover and I listen to the music. It's like I see that in my mind when, like, them colors, that color scheme, that design.
That image.
Yeah, exactly. And The Way of All Flesh does that for me, and then this album does that for me too, where there's not a disconnect. It's almost like you're in that world. You're like in that little CD jacket. You know what I mean? Like,
I feel that way about From Mars to Sirius. I feel like I'm swimming with the flying whales.
Right.
Like, I am on that journey. I am seeing where dragons dwell. Like, I am in that sky. Like, I feel like I am in that artwork, just going with that music. I swim through that album. With respect to L'Enfant Sauvage, Joe sat down and did like a playthrough on one of these songs, and it speaks to your point where he's showing us how to play the title track. And I'm like, it's fucking easy. But when you've got a world-class drummer behind you, just doing everything that he does on that riff, and the way that they lock into it, and how that the accent on it is almost like it's like an up down stroke, but it's on that up stroke.
Yeah,
you know?
It's like
so it's like
that note is more pronounced than all the other ones. And it's that up stroke, which is always hard to get clean to that.
But so it's just, I'm watching him. He's just like, it's really pretty simple, and he's showing it to me. And I'm like, yeah, God, that is really simple, to the point of like, I wouldn't have bothered writing that unless I had Mario as my drummer,
right? Because
it's like, what is this without an amazing drummer behind it? But sometimes you hear something in your head, you're like, okay, I can do that, and then you start playing it, and like, it's fucking simple.
Yeah.
And I might not have written something that simple, because I feel in my world, I'm like, I got to have a little bit more panache, a little je ne sais quoi, if you will.
Right.
I got to have a little something on it, a little spice, because I don't sit around the house with one of the best drummers in the world. I have to be more creative in my own environment. But yeah, they have this way about making a really simple riff stand out and jump off the page. And I think this album has a ton of catchy, heavy riffs It's loaded with melody, and these guys aren't, again, they're not like melodic solo shredders. They just have a way of taking really simple melodies, couple of notes, and just extrapolating and carrying out over the top of the heavy riff that they have written. So for me, yeah, this is their number one album, and for good reason. Everything that they've done in their career kind of funnels into this album, and you can see from this album where they would go with the next two albums. I want to see them bring back some of that energy that exists on this album. They definitely done more in like a hard rock vein on the last two albums, and they still have like the singles that they put out still remind me of the singles that came out from this album. It's just that in the rest of the album, instead of there being like a really deep, dark, heavy core batch of songs, they've got more of these hard rock songs with a lot more melody, a lot more atmosphere, and a lot more chorus. And I feel like that's good. And they did that. They had already been doing that. I want like more heavy, but catchy heavy, and not just heavy for the sake of it, chugging along.
And we also got to remember, I believe around Magma time, they were on tour with Metallica.
Yeah.
Right? And Volbeat.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the kind of music that they're, like, kind of playing because they see what Metallica's doing. You're on tour with Metallica, the biggest metal band in all of history. You know, so, of course, you might have a little more accessibility or be inspired to write a little more accessible things, you know, as you're getting these bigger tours and these bigger opportunities, and you're trying to be a little more accessible because they just came out and played The Way of All Flesh from beginning to end. Maybe some Metallica fans might be like, what the fuck is going on? This is a little much for me.
Yeah. The average Metallica fan is going to struggle with some Gojira.
Right.
And I've definitely pitched this band to fans of that style of music where they kind of draw the line at like heavy metal, and I don't need all that screaming, bro. Like, that's too much for me. But Gojira is another instance of a band where those fry vocals, by and large, are audible.
Yeah.
It seems that way to me anyway, because I've listened to some stuff where it's just straight puke in the bowl.
Yeah.
It's just
we've heard some stuff on this show that's
there's no discernibility in the lyrics whatsoever. And so to those people, you know, I think eventually they either hear a couple songs and like, oh yeah, that is pretty cool, and there might be something there. And there's a lot of discernibility in those vocals and audibility. You can understand what is being said over time. And then even more to my point is the choruses where Joe will switch it up to a clean vocal, or he'll just enunciate very clearly what's going on. And I think that gives the band a lot of accessibility when you have choruses that soar. And again, it's just and then it's just songwriting. Like I'm not even trying to show you anything flashy from any instrument perspective whatsoever. It's just, here's the power chords, here's Joe's vocals. Joe's come a long way with the vocals to be able to do a great amount of diversity, from the low guttural to like the high pitched screams to just the high pitched cleans, if you will. And I think they've had a great career so far. I'm looking forward to what's next. Definitely one of my favorite bands of all time. If I had to sit on an island and pick one band, these guys might be in the mix. You know, like, it's a hard thing to pick, but they've got enough diversity in their songwriting. So for me, to see them perform on the Olympics was just like, I heard about it and I was like, that's weird. I almost had a hard time believing it, but then it just blew the lid off of everybody and everything in the metal community. And I think for good reason. It gave me the inspiration to go back and listen to all of these albums again. And like, I'm going to listen to every single Gojira album. That's how hype I am on them doing this Olympic performance. I wanted to be in the know on everything that they put out and speak to it again. And for the fans of our show too, the listeners, like, if you're not a fan of Gojira, that's fine. But I still think there's at least an album for everybody in here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, there's something for everybody in their catalog.
Yeah, and I think that people that don't like this band, I think they're they're the type of people that don't have anything going on. Like, why would you go out of your way to hate this band?
Yeah,
like, it's a mystery to me. Like, there's so much good music here. I mean, to me, it just speaks to your taste and who you are as a person. I wouldn't even go out of my way to hate a band that I don't like. I mean, I do some ribbing for some bands, because I'm like, I haven't put out anything good in 20 years.
Yeah.
But like, I still enjoy what I do, and I'm not gonna try and beat up any band. But I don't think there's a bad thing to say about this band, really. I mean,
nah, not really. Not even on their,
not even on their number 7.
Greatest. Yeah, their worst stuff is still better than a lot of people's best stuff. So we'll just leave it at that. So
Yeah.
with that being said, do you have anything else to say about Gojira? Because I know you could talk about them all day. Because
No.
I know you love Gojira.
Only that I'm heavily debating on trying to get out to one of these shows, either Detroit or Chicago, coming up in the next month and a half. And you know, I've only seen them the one time that was on the Way of All Flesh tour, and I will say this: the loudest band I've ever heard. It was like in a kind of a small hall. I'd be surprised if there was 1,000 people in there. Like, we're talking about smaller than the Intersection, almost like a large Fraternity of Eagles room, like second story, some hood in Chicago. I don't even know where. Like, I couldn't even find my way back to it. If you like dropped me off in Chicago, it was like a place I'd never been, and just crushingly heavy. My ears hurt. Somebody gave me a set of earplugs. Like, I was holding my ears pinched shut. Like, painful. It was so fucking loud. And I tried to put these earplugs in, but they were like that hard twist-in plastic with the, like, the connect, like the string connector. And I was
connector.
like, no.
Yeah.
I tried. That hurt worse. It didn't mitigate the sound enough, and my ears were just like throbbing. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna suffer it, and I didn't let it take away from the show. Just one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. It's an intimate setting. And you're not going to get that now, right? You're not going to get Gojira in like a 1,000 capacity room.
No, not when they toured with Metallica and they opened the Olympics.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're not getting that small performance out of them anymore. So I did get to see them in a very unique setting, very small show. I think Car Bomb opened up the show, so that's an interesting band. Great percussive, instrumentation going on with that band. Kind of like Meshuggah meets Deftones there. But anyway. Very cool concert. I got to see them in. I'd like to see them again in a much higher production quality live setting, but we'll see. It's got to happen at least one more time in this life, I hope. But
and then before we wrap this up, so I happened to just type in like Gojira albums, and on Genius, the website genius.com is Gojira albums.
Yeah.
So it looks like there was a Sea Shepherd EP that was on release because they lost the file.
Oh, God.
So there was a EP in there. It looks like from 1996. They have a
Victim?
It's demo, yeah.
Oh, is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
And it says it features a very classic death metal sound. Only Mario DePlanter was only 15 at the time during this.
They've been rocking with the Sea Shepherd for a long time, which I mentioned on the news that we just discussed, is that he's trying to free Paul Watson from incarceration in Japan.
And then they have another album called Possessed, which is their second demo, and it says under the name Godzilla.
Okay.
And it also features a very classic death metal sound, which I could understand. So they got a few things out there that I'd never even really heard of. So they have another demo, and it was released under the name of Godzilla.
Okay.
And that's called Saturate.
Never heard of it.
Yeah. And then
some fan.
Yeah. And then Wisdom Comes, and that's when they're under the Gojira moniker, and that released in 2000. And that looks like it has some of the same songs as Terra Incognita off it, so it must have been another demo. So they do have a few pieces of music out there that I've never even heard of. But the only thing that's actually released on like streaming is basically Terra Incognita through all of the albums that we just spoke about. So
yeah, I mean, you'd have to be like almost a sycophant, in my opinion, where you're like listening to some of the raw demos from before the first album.
Some of that stuff's not even necessary. Like, and that's why it's not on streaming, because they were just. I mean, Mario was 15 on the one that we just talked about.
Yeah,
and they were called Godzilla before that. Apparently.
I will
say that's what it was. So
they've got, and I believe it's a live album, The Link Alive from 2004.
Yep.
And then they've got what is it? The Flesh Alive in 2012. Now I own that one on DVD, and that's awesome, because the only way that could be better is if they had waited to do that until after L'Enfant Sauvage, because I want to see that material live, which I haven't yet at all. I did get to see them on the Way of All Flesh tour. It was nice to buy that DVD and like kind of be teleported back in time to when I saw them live. So owning that is pretty dope. Kind of like the Death DVD, Live Death in L.A.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the show we saw them in Detroit. It's like the exact same vibe.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. I just I either need to see them in concert, or I need to have a new live DVD where they play some stuff from the core 3 albums in the middle of the road there, in the middle of the pack, and capture that with the best live sounding quality that they can.
Cool.
But one of my favorite bands of all time. Glad we could do this episode.
Oh, yeah. Glad we could, too. So with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed that. Let us know how you rank Gojira albums in the comments below. We would be interested to see where you rank your Gojira albums if you're that much of a fan, which you should be. So
we're telling you to be a fan.
We're telling you to be. Go crank it. And
go Gojira.
You guys have a great day. Much love. Peace. Thank you so much for checking out the episode. Be sure to hit that like button and give us a share.
Yeah, and if you enjoyed our podcast today, please give it a rating on your streaming service to help us gain some exposure.
And if you really enjoyed the show, please give us a follow or hit that subscribe button and come hang out with us every week. And remember, keep it metal.